It's rolling.
It is going. Right.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And good morning.
Good morning.
I think I know most of you know me, understand about this thing that I do, but for the record, my name is MacGougan, and I have a hobby of doing stand-up comedy in churches and about churches. I say stand-up comedy. In point of fact, I do this in Episcopal churches, so technically it's stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, kneel comedy. And in honor of Trinity's current transitional status, I'm going to do a routine today about the rector search process. And I want to start with a question: when does the search process begin? What is the first moment of this process? There is an answer to this question. The answer is it begins during the Dear John sermon. Okay? The Dear John sermon is the moment when the outgoing rector stands up in the pulpit to publicly announce to the congregation that he or she will be leaving. Okay? You can tell that it's the Dear John sermon because it will include the phrase, "being your rector these past years." and typically the message is something along the lines of, "Being your rector these past years has been the great joy and privilege of my life, but now I am out of here." Okay, there are two principal versions of the Dear John sermon. Version A is, "Being your rector these past years has been the great joy of my life, but now, unfortunately for me as well as for you, God is calling me to serve a parish that is bigger and richer than this one." Or version B, "Being your rector these past years has been the great joy of my life, but now I've reached the stage of my life where I realize that it will bring me even more joy not to be your rector anymore." Either way, it's a delicate message to deliver. And I know that priests who have to deliver a Dear John sermon will agonize over every word. And I tell my clergy friends not to sweat, okay? Because when we hear "being your rector these past years," we tune out, okay? We don't hear you anymore. It's not that we mean to be rude, it's simply that we are distracted. We are distracted by this dark purple cloud that is growing and billowing over our heads with a white ribbon across it with the words, "impending search process." And make no mistake, it is a process, okay? It's a very distinct, deliberate process. It's evolved in interesting ways over the years, and it's a very well-documented process. If you're interested, I recommend that you visit the ECIT website. You know ECIT, right? Used to be the diocese. Here's the problem with the term the diocese. Diocese is a funny word. It sounds funny. It's hard to tell if it's singular or plural. Many people, especially people outside the church, don't have any idea what it means, so it wasn't communicating effectively. Well, problem solved. Now we have ECIT. So if you visit the ECIT website, you can find the rector search process. It's a very neatly laid out document. You can download it, you can print it off, have it, hang it from your rearview mirror, whatever you want to do. What you will find is that officially it is a 28-step process. Okay? And this is, what does that sound like? Well, of course, it sounds like an old Alfred Hitchcock movie, yes. But it also, to the new Episcopalian, it sounds like a lot of steps to fill a current position. But those people really have no idea how correct they are because, in fact, when you look at this process in more detail, you find that many of the steps really have been condensed. And so if you just put a little more detail in, many of these steps could actually be 10 or more steps, so you can really think of it as a 280-step process. The first few are very simple. Step one, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the rector announces that he or she is leaving. Then you have a couple of steps that don't have anything to do with us, okay? The rector has to touch base with Eckett, and they work some stuff out. But it comes back to us, step 4. Parish says goodbye to the old rector. Okay, notice the terminology. This person, right up to the moment of the Dear John sermon, was simply the rector. Now they are the old rector. Technically, right now, the lame duck rector, soon to be the former rector. And we say goodbye. How do we do that? We say goodbye by throwing a party, okay? And I tell my clergy friends, like it or not, this is your chance to find out how popular you were in your served parish. And here's how you tell, okay? If the outgoing rector was widely popular, very well-liked, well-respected throughout the parish, what you get is a very nice party, okay? Well-attended, with tasty refreshments, with tasteful decorations, nice speeches, as we did for our beloved Father Don last March, if you recall. On the other hand, in those rare and unfortunate cases where the rector is not so universally well-liked and well-respected, what you get instead is a huge party with a band and dancing until dawn. The going-away party is typically a poignant moment for many of us because of the rules that we have in the Episcopal Church. In the Episcopal Church, when someone retires from being our rector, they are also expected to retire from existing in our same space-time continuum. This is accomplished through a process that we borrowed from the FBI Witness Protection Program. So I don't pretend to know all the details, but it's my general understanding that Father Don and Debbie now are living in a secure, undisclosed location, in disguise, under assumed names. And I believe, just to give the whole thing an appropriately biblical flavor, that Debbie is posing as Don's sister. So the rector leaves. And especially when you've had a long time serving rector, it is a disorienting moment for the parish. You know, for those of us here, it's sort of the emotional equivalent of having been in a long-term personal relationship, and then for whatever reason, you aren't anymore. So if you look at Trinity Church's Facebook page, you'll see that the church's status is now listed as single. By the way, did you all know that Trinity has a Facebook page? Yeah. It's part of a very deliberate strategy by the church. We don't want to just reach out to people who are exactly like us, okay? We also want to reach out to people who are older. Ooh, sorry about that. So, Trinity Church is now out on the dating scene again, after a long hiatus. And lo and behold, the world has changed since we were doing this a mere 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, who knew? For one thing, the balance of power has shifted here. It used to be back in the day that it was a buyer's market for clergy, okay? Plenty to choose from, plenty of ordained fish in the sea, lots of choices, whether we're talking about the interim or especially when we're talking about candidates for the actual rector position. In fact, back in those days, it was considered a problem. Too many clergy. How are we going to find good work for all these fine people? Well, for those of you who have spent the last 15 or 20 years worrying about that problem, I have really good news for you. Turns out that our church leadership has managed to solve that problem with a vengeance. And we'll get to that, but another thing that has changed is the terminology, things like titles. So when we were doing this in the past, we were primarily dealing with the diocesan deployment officer. Okay, remember that? Now, as I mentioned earlier, no more diocese, now we have Eckett. We also don't have a deployment officer anymore. Problem with the term deployment officer, and I made this joke at the time, was that it sounded military, okay? Sounded like we were recruiting priests to wage war against our enemies, which is not the message that we want to send, of course. So today, instead of a deployment officer, we have a CML, Canon for Mission Leadership, because nothing conveys peaceful, non-military activities more emphatically than missions and cannons. So at this point in the process, the old rector has left. We don't have an interim yet. We get a friendly pastoral visit from the canon, the non-military canon. And no, it is not your imagination, but these friendly pastoral visits are often quite awkward, okay? And here's why I think that is. The ostensible purpose of the friendly visit from the canon is to reassure the parish that the wider church of which we are a part has not forgotten about us, okay? But meanwhile, those of us in the parish have been hoping against hope that the wider church had forgotten about us completely. We are sort of thinking of this interregnum period as a kind of sabbatical from participating in the wider church. That in our daydream, this is an opportunity for us to be Congregationalists for a year without having to learn any new hymns. So when you think about the canon reassuring us that the wider church hasn't forgotten about us, here's the image that's in my head. Mom and Dad are going out for the evening, and they are leaving their teenage children at home without a babysitter, okay? And then in the middle of the evening, after the dinner out and before the concert that's going to come later, Mom decides to swing back home to reassure the kids that they haven't been forgotten about. So at this point, having been duly reassured, we are ready to embark on the portion of the process that has to do with securing the services of an interim. Now, back in the day, this was a quick, simple, easy process that I would compare to picking up a rental car, okay? Car's in the shop, you need some way to go around. What do? You go to the rental car place, and what do when you get there? You see what's on the lot, right? It's going to be a hodgepodge of things on the lot. Chances are probably not your dream car is on the lot, but there might be some fairly nice cars, you don't know. And chances are something on the lot will meet your short-term needs. And if not, if by some chance nothing on the lot will work for you at all, you can just decide to come back next week and there'll be other choices on the lot, okay? So, and then whether it's this week or next week, once you pick something out, then you fill out a couple forms, you give them your credit card, and you're good to go, okay? Not so much in 2019, it turns out. For us, this year, rather than being like picking up a rental car, securing the services of an interim is more like scoring Hamilton tickets. Okay? It's not impossible, it can be done, but it takes a certain amount of determination and persistence. And don't expect to be sitting down watching the show next weekend, okay? Or even next month, or even the month after that. So in our case, as you may recall, Father Don left in March. We were reassured by the canon a week or two after that. And then the next notable milestone didn't come until August. Some of you may remember this. One of the Sunday services in August, during the announcement time, one of the wardens got up and said, "We know this is taking a while, but we're working really hard on it. We've made a lot of progress. We're on the home stretch. We're on the 2-yard line. We just need 5 more signatures, and we'll be able to introduce you to your new interim." Well, this was an interesting message to receive. On the one hand, we were very pleased to know that progress was made. We're almost there. But the last little tip-in is 5 more signatures? It raises the question, how many signatures does it take to hire an interim. You know, is this like petitioning your way onto the ballot where you need thousands of signatures? The Secretary of State has to check them over, make sure they're all valid. And as you may recall, it took another month after that to track down those pesky last 5 signatures and give us the chance to welcome our wonderful Father Norman, for whom we are all so grateful. Thank you for being here. Now I have to remember where I was. Where am I? Hold on. So we get those 5 signatures. So this is an example of how the written process understates the level of effort involved on our part, okay? Because this whole thing, which ended up taking us 7 months of hard labor by both our wardens, and the final tip-in was 5 apparently very difficult to achieve signatures. This whole thing appears in the written document as one step, step 7, and step 7 has 2 words. Interim arrives. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? Sort of makes you wonder, well, why didn't you just make it the whole thing a one-step process and say, new rector arrives? So now we have an interim, and that means that now we can proceed with the rest of the rector search process, which we had to wait, because this whole thing, by design, this is not built for efficiency, okay? It's a very sequential process. Everything is done in series, nothing is done in parallel. And so now we can go forward, and this confuses some people. They think, oh, because the process can go forward now that we have an interim, the interim must be the person who is working directly with us on this search process, which is not the case, okay? Interim does everything else. Basically, you can boil it down and say what the interim's job is to keep the plate spinning and keep our heads screwed on right, despite the fact that there is a rector search process going on at the same time, which is no small feat, okay? Hard enough to keep the plate spinning and keep our heads screwed on right in the best of times. When you do it during a rector search process, that adds another level of difficulty to the whole enterprise. So the person who does help us through this process is the transition consultant, the TC. TC is sort of like our realtor, okay? They're going to help us through this navigating this whole choice and how do you work the details out and what's available on the market, you know. And I would like to just stop for a moment here to apologize to the clergy who are present, because I believe at this point I've compared you to cars and theater tickets and real estate. The first thing the transition consultant does is to sit down with the wardens, and they choose up and recruit a transition team, which I will refer to as a single team, although typically I believe it's subdivided into task groups around the various specific tasks that they need to do. But taken as a whole, they are roughly comparable to the search committee that you may recall from past years. Search committee was a very unusual thing. It was a church committee that people actually wanted to be on. Okay, in fact, typically more people wanted to be on the search committee than could comfortably be accommodated, which it created some tension that we are not well equipped to deal with in the church, okay? We're not used to this. We don't normally have to worry about who gets to teach Sunday school this year. Who's going to be offended if we don't let them lead the annual appeal this year? Not a problem, but people wanted to be on the search committee because those were the people who were going to pick the next rector, okay? Turns out that while we love, admire, and respect our fellow parishioners, we do not trust them to pick the next rector. We want to do it ourselves. This would always, of course, be expressed in terms of what's best for the parish. I'm not saying it has to be me. I'm simply saying that some member of the search committee ought to be a left-handed former Methodist who's on the altar guild. The irony of this whole situation was that once the dust had settled and some group had been picked and they started meeting, the winners of this whole thing quickly realized this was not such a plum, you know? That eventually, essentially they had signed up for a year's worth of jury duty, locked in a room with 11 other people, you know, trying to figure something out together. So I don't think we're going to have that same issue with the transition team, because the transition team, as we will see in a moment, does not pick the next rector. They do various things, but their final product is a short list that goes to the vestry, okay? And the vestry is going to end up making the final choice. So now at this point, all the players are in place. We have our interim, we have our transition consultant, we have our transition team, everybody that you need to actually do the search. So does that mean we are ready to do the search? No, of course not. This is a spiritual process, and far be it from us to rush willy-nilly, headlong, into a hiring process, okay? Rushing willy-nilly, headlong being the Episcopal phrase for taking any active steps to fill a position that probably at this point hasn't even been sitting open for a year yet. So instead, the next 3 steps in the process all have to do with mission discernment, okay? Why is this parish even here in the first place? What do we think God is up to in our served community? How can we participate in that work most effectively? These are very, very important questions, and this is a lousy time to ask them, okay? What this reminds me of is sometimes in my work life, I am asked to give an informational presentation to a group that is having some kind of a meeting, maybe an all-day meeting, maybe a multi-day meeting, when they will have many such presentations. I will be one of many, and so I'm always interested to see where do I fit on the agenda. And it's always bad news if I'm the last thing of the day, okay? Because I know then that I'm going to be standing up talking about something to people who don't care. People who are tired and cranky and impatient, and they will look at me and all they will see is the last thing standing between them and happy hour. And when I'm in that position, whatever I was planning to do, I'm skinning it down to the barest bones possible, and it's still too much, okay? So think about this mission discernment. We are months and months and months into this whole process. We've got everybody in place, and the last thing standing between us and actually being able to get applicants and think about who's going to be the new rector is mission discernment. So it's almost guaranteed at this point to get short shrift, which might cause you to ask, okay, well, Mark, well, how do you think that process ought to be done? And I would say, I think that process ought to be done the way we did it at Trinity not that long ago, which was to have a process led by a trusted rector involving a significant portion of the parish that in an unhurried fashion over the course of a couple of years can think about these issues clearly. And so, having done that, my hope when I look at this process is that in academic terms, that this mission discernment can be considered a prerequisite that it might be possible to test out of. We'll see how that works out for us. The idea here is that the mission discernment should then be translated into goals. And the goals then, that's the last missing piece. Once we have goals for the parish for the coming years, that becomes part of the job description of the incoming rector. And now we combine that with everything else, and we have all that we need to post the position, and the canon then declares the search to be open. That is step 15. Remember, this is a 28-step process. First 14 steps are all pregame. Kickoff is step 50. And once it's open, then we can receive applications for some window of time that we determine. Typically it's 1 to 2 months. So for that month or two, we just have to sit and wait and see what's going to come in. There's nothing we can do, we just have to see who's going to apply. When we get to that point, I guarantee you it's going to seem like a long time, but I would just remind us all that even if we spend the full 2 months, even if we spend a little longer than the 2 months, it's still going to be a lot shorter than the time it took us to achieve step 7, interim arrives. These applications do not come directly to us, by the way. The applications go to the canon, who incidentally is free to discard any that she feels are inappropriate or beneath our notice. But the rest gets saved up. You know, what I'm picturing actually is the way we used to do Valentine's Day when I was in elementary school. You know, we all had a pouch, and they get filled up, and you don't get them until everybody's gone, and then you dump out all your pouch at once. So at the end of our window, we get to dump out our pouch and see what our Valentines are, see who wants to be our next rector. And at this point, something interesting happens to the process, for which I need to take a drink of water. Some of you may have seen there's a certain kind of a bicycle race that they show during the Olympics. It happens indoors on an indoor oval. First 9/10 of the race, all the competitors are going around the oval as slowly as humanly possible. just moving enough so that they don't tip over, you know? And then at some moment, and to the casual observer, it's hard to tell why this happens, but at some moment, everybody's pedaling as fast as they can for the finish line. This is the moment where that happens in the search process, okay? Up until now, everything has been, take your time, this is a spiritual process, you know, smell the roses, and now, well, you know, time's a wasting, let's get going here. And for some people, they think, well, this is sort of ironic that these same people who were telling us to hold our horses, now they're concerned about time. Some people see in it a double standard, but it's just a change of circumstances, okay? That up until this point, it's only been a couple of hundred rectorless lay people who were waiting and feeling up in the air, but now, possibly as many as a dozen applicant clergy are waiting and up in the air. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? What I meant to say was, hooray, this is good news. Now everybody has the same sense of urgency that we do. So we see these applications, and the transition team has a tricky job to do now. They have to go through, and based on the applications alone, they pick 5 semifinalists, okay? And those semifinalists, they interview first by Skype, and if the Skype call goes relatively well, then they'll bring them in for a longer interview in person. And based on all those interviews, then they determine a short list of finalists, minimum of 3, maximum of all 5 of the semifinalists if they think they're equally worthy of consideration. And this all needs to be done expeditiously, and in fact, if any one of the 5 drops out, then those interviews stop, and the remaining 4 get forwarded immediately to the vestry as the finalists, okay? Because time's a wasting now. You might wonder, well, why does the vestry get to make this decision? There are 2 important reasons, okay? First of all, the vestry is the duly elected representative of the parish. Those of you who have been to any of our annual meetings will know just how hard-fought those vestry elections can be. The other reason is objectivity, okay? Because at this point, the transition team knows these candidates better than anybody, so it only stands to reason that they would show favoritism towards the stronger candidates. So the vestry decides, and however, that doesn't necessarily end it, because there's a step here. that's been implicit throughout this whole process, but is explicit at this point, which is that every decision of the parish must be approved by the bishop, which most people understand to mean that the bishop has a veto power over the choice. There are those who understand it differently, though, who believe that, in fact, the principle means that the bishop is forbidden to veto the choice because, of course, every decision of the parish must be approved by the bishop. Anyway, we will hope that we don't have to argue that point, that our choice is approved by the bishop, and we're getting close to the end here now, okay? Step 27, the interim leaves. The interim leaves before the new rector arrives. The interim, of course, has not been allowed to be a candidate to be the new rector, but there will be some conspiracy theorists who say that the new rector, in fact, is the interim in disguise, because one left before the other came. They were never photographed together. Step 28, hooray, hooray, new rector arrives. It does get there eventually. It's not explicit in the written document, but it is traditional at this point that the new rector enjoys a honeymoon period with the parish, which is only logical at this point. We have spent a lot of time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears, both getting ready to make this choice and to go through this process and to find this person and make this choice. So it only stands to reason that this person can do no wrong. For some lucky rectors, this honeymoon period lasts as long as a day or two. Thank you all. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be well.